Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul. In this video, we're breaking down Alien. Now, Alien is without a doubt one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time. It combines the best elements of horror in a world that's one of the most stylistic universes we've ever seen. That lo-fi tech, the long industrial tunnels of the Nostromo, and just the costuming characters in general are all forever iconic. I've just picked up a book on H.R. Giger's work, and though it doesn't correctly tell you how to pronounce his name, it sucks you into his insane imagination that acted as the basis for cinema's most iconic Alien. The pages are just full of stuff like this, and overall, yeah, you can pretty much turn to anything and you're going to get hit with an instantly memorable image that forever lodges itself in your brain. Inspired by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the aim was to make a horror merged with sci-fi. It's also in the rare pantheon of movies that invites debate over which is better, the original or the sequel. That's up there with things like Godfather Part 1 and 2, Star Wars, Terminator, or American Pie. Now, speaking of Star Wars, this movie may have not been greenlit had George Lucas not changed cinema history. Prior to this, 20th Century Fox had no interest in funding sci-fi, but since Star Wars was the biggest movie ever, it made sense to just greenlight other projects. Luckily, we got one of cinema's best, but around the time, there was some big duds as well. But the idea for Alien came about after writer Dan O'Bannon worked on Dark Star with John Carpenter. Both that and Alien featured a group of blue-collar workers on a seemingly mundane mission along with a murderous alien. O'Bannon originally titled this movie Memory and only had 29 pages written. These are what would become the film's opening, and we had the crew waking up and arriving at a mysterious distress beacon. In the original draft, their ship would then be damaged and they'd find themselves stranded on the planet. In this, the iconic xenomorph was nowhere to be seen, and that only came in after a failed attempt at a Dune movie. We talked about this more in our breakdown on part 1, but both O'Bannon and Giger were hired to work on that. During this, O'Bannon was horrified and disturbed by Giger's work, and he went on to write the antagonist as a Giger-style monster. After the Dune movie fell through, he then incorporated his other movie ideas of a gremlin infiltrating a B-17 bomber, which became the second half of Alien. Memory became Star Beast, and then it was finally titled Alien. O'Bannon wasn't shy about his influences either, and stated that the Thing from Another World inspired the stalking creature in a tight environment. I think that this and The Thing work perfectly together almost as accompanying pieces, and the two stand as some of my favourite films ever. Beyond this, the warning not to land on an alien planet was taken from Forbidden Planet, and the discovery of the engineer was taken from Planet of the Vampires. Most agreed that the script was something special, but tensions arose when David Giler and Walter Hill, who were connected to 20th Century Fox, made rewrites that O'Bannon hated. He felt they were trying to attribute the script solely to co-writer Ron Stewart, but in the end, O'Bannon was granted the sole screenwriting credit. Has to be said though, that Giler and Hill actually added a lot to the film, most notably Ash. To me, he's the movie's most interesting character, and I love the curveball of the characters realizing there's even someone amongst their ranks who is working against them. Ash's name beginning with an A, and also being an android, is something that the franchise actually keeps up throughout, and when viewed in release order, the main titles all have androids in them whose initial ascends in alphabetical order. For example, A is for Ash in Alien, B is for Bishop in Aliens in Alien 3, Call appears in Alien Resurrection, and Prometheus gets that D in David. But yeah, things rolled ahead quickly because of Star Wars, and the producers were impressed by Ridley Scott's movie The Duelist. They got him on board, and though the movie originally had a budget of $4.5 million, this was then brought up to $8.5 when the studio was really impressed by his storyboards. I have to say that I can totally buy into that too, and I think what really sets this movie apart from other sci-fi horrors is just the look and feel of the film. That to me is what sets Alien apart, and unfortunately it's stuff that Scott's even failed to recapture himself. I'm looking at you, Prometheus, but that's a tale for another day, and for the next part of the video, I want to go through Alien scene by scene and discuss how this masterpiece was brought to the silver screen. It's a film that's very close to my heart, and I vividly remember my granddad taping it for me when I was 4. Yes, 4 years old. He apparently just looked at the film name and thought it would be cool for his little young kid to watch, and here we are over 30 years later. Scott is also from where I live in South Shields, and they often have big celebrations of his work around the area, so it feels very close to home. This video will also cover both the theatrical and director's cut that was released in 2003. Those can be found on the Alien anthology set or the Alien quadrilogy DVD set from around that time. This is an updated one, it's in HD, it looks slightly better, but yeah, They released basically every single version of the film with a director's cut included. Now Aliens is, yeah, I think they improve on it there, but for Alien, I don't know, I kind of felt let down a bit. Scott even says that the theatrical cut is still his vision and the director's cut was more of an experiment. It's actually 1 minute shorter than the theatrical version, and I think it's kind of cut more like a modern movie rather than like the long feeling of dread that I get with the theatrical. Now that's seen right from the off with the slow reveal of the title and the slow, droning, iconic music. We watch as the letters slowly start to appear, and originally these would have been made from flesh and bone, but that was deemed far too gory. I also think it would have taken away from the mystique, and I prefer that they kept the alien hidden until it's revealed down the line. Predator and The Thing, you know, they both open with the ship in space, and yeah, I don't know, I feel like it always kind of spoiled the mystery, even though we know what it is. Yes, I have seen those movies several times, but I just wish they held it off. The titles themselves were created by design company RGA, and they were hired to work after the studio loved their work on the teaser trailer. The title itself almost feels like it's an alien language too, as the letters slowly fade in. On first viewing, we don't really know what the word will be, and they're almost like hieroglyphics, throwing us off balance until the name of the film's finally revealed. It's an uneasy way to start the movie, with there being large gaps of silence and minor drones from the score. But this is a really slow burn, and we actually don't get a single piece of dialogue for 7 minutes. This company also created the stunning titles for Superman and Predator, and hey, if you want something in space, these are your guys. And we then see the Nostromo, which at first appears almost like a space rock. Giger's style was known as biomechanical, and it was a horrifying mix between natural things and metallic ones. And they were sexy as hell as well. But overall, the ship being like this just plays into the aesthetic. Things in this movie hide in plain sight, with the xenomorph resembling the interior of the Nostromo. Everything just feels like it's building off one design, and because of this, it all comes together perfectly. The name Nostromo itself was also coined by Joseph Conrad, and this means shipmate. The Sulaco in Aliens was named after the town that was featured in that book, and it's sort of like poetry, they rhyme. The ship itself was originally going to be called Snark and then Leviathan, but these names lived on via two ships that Dallas served on before the Nostromo. The ship is currently halfway through its trip back to Earth, and this is after it's been loading up at Thetis. That is in the Epsilon Reticuli system, which is actually a real-life location in space. Kinda like how Tau Ceti was used in Project Hail Mary. Just adds a layer of authenticity to the movie, and the Nostromo is sort of like a spacefaring Battersea power station, which makes it one of the most unique looking ships in sci-fi. And to be honest, it's also extremely dull. However, I think it being so mundane works perfectly because it just adds to the feeling this is a run-of-the-mill job. I think in sci-fi movies in general, you're often selling like the fantastical elements, so you have to make things big, operatic and otherworldly. However, having it just be this dull, ugly ship kinda helps the film feel a bit more realistic. Like, this ain't Star Wars or Star Trek, mate. The ship is shit. It was originally also going to be yellow, but Scott asked for it to be changed to Battleship Grey, which adds to the authenticity. Scott also said the ship had to be slow moving and realistic, and more like 2001: A Space Odyssey as opposed to Star Wars. Scott actually did borrow slightly from that movie though, and just in the same way we get an opening on the Star Destroyer, Alien starts off with this opening on the Nostromo. The undersides of the ship are also shot in similar ways, and it helps to add to the scope and scale of the vessels. As we look about the ship, we can see what is the ore storage and auto refineries, and without these, it looks much smaller. The inside also diverts from the usual sort of sci-fi bridge you'd expect to being something much more claustrophobic. We then see the corridors of the ship itself, with Scott originally planning for there to be flying robots with sensors that would be referred to as mice. They'd fix any problem that they came across, and they kind of remind me of the Scutters from Red Dwarf, although that came out after. Prometheus would later adapt this idea as well, with David and Mother running things while the crew slept. Everything was just stripped and dialed back though, as it was getting far too close to Star Wars. In the end, this isn't a fancy Starship Enterprise, a Star Destroyer. It's very trashy, there's clothes strewn on seats, drinking birds, and just a little bit of personality. These birds themselves sort of playing in the notion of eggs, and we see 3 eggs vibrating as we go across the ship. Eggs become a big point later on, which you can see by the poster behind me. We then get the long corridors that lead to the crew's chambers, which were originally created to be like a vagina. In the original script, the xenomorph would then stalk the female crew members and be fixated on their anatomy. This fits in quite well with how the facehuggers infect people as they forcefully impregnate their victims, something that O'Bannon has talked very in depth about since, and the interspecies sexual assault is intended to unsettle viewers, especially around the ideas of male rape, or grape because we're on YouTube. Beyond that, the idea of impregnation ties in with motherhood, and we have the ship's computer named Mother. So there's lots of these little ties throughout, and we then see as the crew awakens almost like they're being born. As we fly through the ship, we then see firefighting outfits as well, and a symbol on the top of the left hallway. This is called the semiotic standard, and it's been used across every Alien franchise film and is now a staple of every movie. Now initially, we as an audience member, we believe the camera is just flying through, but the paper begins to rustle, which makes it seem that something sinister's on board, like a presence moving through the corridors. Gives a feeling of voyeurism and almost like we're the ones wandering the corridors ourselves. Just plays into the notion of stalking and that someone somewhere is watching over the crew. Speaking with GQ, Ridley Scott also said he always wanted to have the camera moving, so it would slightly unsettle the viewer. We then focus on the emergency helmets as the ship comes to life after receiving the distress call. It's incredibly analog, which is something that Scott later used in 1982's Blade Runner. Scott reused some of the graphics from here, such as the purge screen at the end, and Aliens confirms that Dallas was indeed a former employee of the Tyrell Corporation. The connection between the two franchises has only gotten stronger over the years though, and they've always felt like they exist in the same universe. What makes this more interesting as well is that Harrison Ford actually turned down the role of Dallas. Alien then went on to be a massive smash hit, and he and Scott would then of course work together on Blade Runner. I'm so glad that Alien Romulus kept this style as well, as it looks far better in my eyes than what we got in the later prequels. Other interesting casting facts include that Meryl Streep was offered the role of Ripley, which is pretty crazy to think of. Veronica Cartwright, who also plays Lambert, thought she was playing Ripley until she arrived in London for the costume fitting. Ripley was also originally written to be a male, and they auditioned lots of men and women for the role. Now, you don't necessarily do that thing when you're writing a script these days, but I think this is what makes the character so strong, as opposed to like, I don't know, like the usual sort of women you got in horrors around the time. Scott said he had this epiphany when casting and realized that making Ripley a woman would just work so much better. I just had a thought. What would you think if Ripley were a woman? She would be the last one you think would survive. She's beautiful. Okay, but whatever the reason, at least we got Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, who for me is on the Mount Rushmore of sci-fi characters. The computer then wakes up the crew. This sequence was intended to be much longer, with the crew being naked, again tying into those birth metaphors. Originally, we were going to open with a close-up on Kane's nostrils and see as he breathes for the first time and then goes into the galley to get some coffee and breakfast. Focusing on Kane is also a very smart way to subvert expectations, as when you do this in a film, you know, you think, that's the main character there. However, he is the first to die, and this is such a great subversion of what you expect. We then see as the crew slowly wake up, and the steady shots of them were used by James Cameron in the sequel Aliens. Scott also said that when the group wakes up, Ash actually takes longer because he's almost like a computer starting up, and this very much mirrors the system on the ship turning on in the beginning. When we cut to Kane, we can also see Ash to the right, and you might notice that Ian Holm isn't actually breathing at this point. And it isn't until much later that he starts to do this. We also have the tubes themselves, which are cylindrical in shape and also look a bit like an egg. We then cut to the crew eating breakfast, and Kane says, "I feel dead," which is more foreshadowing. In the film, all of the cast members are also referred to by their last name as a way to address them professionally, and this is even the case for the cat too. Jonesy is very much seen as a member of the crew as well, and the animal is of course there to boost morale. However, them not using their first names creates a bit of distance and shows they aren't really friendly beyond their roles at the company. Jonesy himself was actually portrayed by 4 different cats, with one being used for holding, the other used for hissing, and the other 2 for running off and running away. And that hiss is iconic as well. What this does though is completely disarm the viewer because the crew is jovial, and it makes the chestburster scene later on all the better because we've had a relaxing scene like this one. Something to pay attention to here as well is that we can see as Ash reaches for a jug of milk. This is something he drinks throughout the movie, and it is thought that this may be replenishing the fluid in his android body. Scott explained that he was inspired by HAL 9000 from Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and AI turning against humans is of course a very timeless message. These influences are also extended to Mother as well, as its full name is Mother 6000. Mother was originally going to be the one who let the infected Kane back on the ship, but in the rewrites it was then replaced by Ash. However, at one point in the script, Ripley would have had a conversation with the machine, basically pleading to be saved, and Mother just replied by saying her loyalty was science. From the off though, we instantly see that Ash is very much a company man, as he says how Mother wants to talk to Dallas. It interrupts the very awkward discussion of pay, which we can tell from Parker is a bit unequal, even though they're all stuck in the same place for the same amount of time and doing the same thing. Now, this video is sponsored by the DC Studio Showcase podcast, which is available on the HBO Max YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Hosted by nerd commentator Frankie Smith and pop culture pundit Coy Jandro, each episode features in-depth conversations with guests from across DC Studios and DC Comics. They deep dive into their latest projects, and with Supergirl and Lanterns right around the corner, they're going to be going over everything all summer long. While we cover the big movies and shows here, these guys take it to the next level and cover the films, the comics, and everything a die-hard DC fan needs to stay in the know. Now, if you saw our last advert for them, then you'll know I was going through Absolute Batman. I was on volume 1 there, I'm on volume 2 now, and I'm bloody loving it, mate! The podcast is the perfect companion to the comics and films, and it highlights must-read issues and what to look out for every single week. The Jim Lee episode is amazing as well, and one that goes over the industry, art, and what makes DC DC. They also have massive guests like James Gunn, Jim Lee, Sean Gunn, Katie Sackhoff, and a ton of other huge names from the DC world. So if you're a DC fan, then you've got to check it out. Head over to the HBO Max YouTube channel using the QR code or the link in the description and search for the DC Studio Showcase. I genuinely cannot recommend it enough. Huge thank you to them for sponsoring the video as well. Now let's get back into the breakdown. We then see Dallas walking to Mother. In the theatrical cut, we have a long panning shot of the deserted bridge, which ends on Dallas standing in the doorway drinking his coffee. The director's cut streamlines things a bit more here though, and cuts down a fair few of the longer shots from the film. Like how the whole process of loading up Mother requires pressing a big button in a key card. There's lots of differences like this throughout though, and if you want to see a list of all the stuff, then head over to moviecensorship.com where they've done a big list of all the changes. Mother itself also feels like it's building off human anatomy, and if the tunnels are the vagines and the fallopian tubes, then this is the brain. At the time, mainframes were also massive bulky devices with reel-to-reel tapes, and this computer simply has a room full of lights, so it's crazy futuristic. I love as well how Dallas walks in with his coffee like he's a trucker sitting down in his big rig. The Now Playing podcast pointed out that these were seen as space truckers, as trucker movies were very popular in the 70s. It's stuff like Duel, Convoy, Smokey and the Bandit, so this just kind of tapped into something people were used to seeing, but it took it to a strange new environment. As we cut to the other characters, we hear Ash say,
"Thank you."
Now, this might be me reaching here, but it seems to me like this might hint at his secret robotic identity. Be careful how you speak to ChatGPT, folks. He's saying thank you, he's a fucking clanker. At Lambert Station, we can also see she has Balaji Imperial cigarettes. This might be a reference to Balaji Badejo, who was the man in the suit for the Xenomorph. Funnily enough, he actually beat out Peter Mayhew for the role, who of course played Chewbacca. Ripley then reports that she has no idea where Earth is, and that they're not even an Earth system. She then tries to flag Antarctica traffic control, which is just a nice little bit of world building to show how the planet's changed. In these early scenes, Ripley is very much a background character, and they don't really draw much attention to her. You obviously wouldn't get how important that she becomes, but I think it's a great touch just focusing on the characters who die. When they do, you're like, oh shit, I don't know what's gonna happen, and it just makes you uneasy for the other characters. Ripley then makes a long-range transmission, and in Scott's original storyboards, he envisioned a large dish that would then unfurl. This didn't make it to the movie, but we do cut to the outside of the ship. They then initially think they're lost, but soon discover this is part of the company's orders. Parker and Brett then seem very hard done by as they work in the bowels of the ship and are very angry that the higher-ups never come down there. It's a really nice way to make the crew all seem fragmented and show that they're kind of cliquey. This is further shown when Parker comes in and shifts Ash out his seat and then begins to dust it off. The pair's work would also be explored in a scene that unfortunately never made it past the storyboards. In the original script, they were going to go outside the ship and investigate the Nostromo. Using a small craft, they'd see that one of the Nostromo seals was damaged, which sets up the ship having issues after leaving LV-426. However, the budget didn't allow for it, which is a shame, but it is something that Scott would later kind of use in Alien Covenant. Dallas then explains that they're only halfway to Earth and they've been diverted off course by Mother. By law, they have to intercept transmissions and investigate them, which Ash brings up right away.
There is a clause in the contract which specifically states any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated.
Now, over the years, they have clarified that Ash and Weyland-Yutani were aware that the creature was out there, and they deliberately sent the ship in that direction. So having Ash be the first to talk about how it's their duty to go is another clue he only cares about the company. Parker then brings up the topic of bonuses, which Ash seems really annoyed about. Again, just showing he's a company man. But he uses this as a way to manipulate the crew, and we learn that if they don't investigate, then their shares are forfeit.
Money.
This is why the idea of money in Descent was brought up earlier. Lambert then manages to locate where the signal is coming from, and in the director's cut, Ash was the first to mention how you can walk on the planet due to the gravity. This further shows how Ash is way more intrigued than the rest of the crew, and how he's coming up with excuses on why they should go instead of why they shouldn't. Which, yeah, mate, and this is during a time when everyone else is like, fuck that, I'm going back to sleep. Bail. The shots of the planet and the ship just look incredible though, especially as the craft starts to descend into the planet's orbit. If you watch a director's cut as well, stuff is a little bit more enhanced with them placing in extra stars. The entire sequence is really balletic though, with a string soaring as they start their slow descent. They actually spoke with real scientists on how to conduct this, and it's about as far away from Star Wars as you can get. When that first released, loads of people came out on the internet, well, they didn't have the internet, but sitting at bus stops being like, actually, taking off and landing on a planet, it's really difficult. Star Wars had lots of quick wipes, and basically made it seem like taking off and landing was like parking a car in a garage. Here though, it's all about authenticity, and they perfectly show how difficult that it is. Like, even when they land, stuff goes haywire and they desperately try to rush and put out fires. On Ripley's station, we can also see a little picture of Jonesy as a kitten, which is a nice bit of world building. But why isn't there a picture of her daughter? Forget about her, did you, Ripley? We also see the words Weyland-Yutani, and they later add the D to the end of Weyland, because I don't know, mate. I spent ages looking for this, and I think it's just a typo. It's something to do with, like, Leyland Toyota or something. Just googled it, it was playing off Leyland Toyota, but they didn't want to add the D because it would make it too obvious and they might get in trouble legally. But yeah, there's a great sense of danger, and the crew's expressions make this seem far from routine. They're risking their lives by landing here, but if they don't, they forfeit all their shares and therefore won't get paid for years of their lives. So it's a must-do. I love how this also humanizes them as well, and though I'm sure like me and you would be like, whoa, let's go to space, mate, that would be amazing. To these guys, it's just another day at the office. Another manic Monday, if you will. Even traveling across the stars just seems very mundane to these guys, and yeah, if you do something enough times, eventually it's gonna get dull. Even if it's as fantastic as watching the 17th alien breakdown that Heavy Spoilers has done. We then get another clue that Ash is the company man during his discussion with Kane.
We can't go anywhere in this.
Well, Mother says the sun's coming up in 20 minutes.
We see that isn't the case later, and it remains dark the entire time they're there.
Bullshit.
But he's constantly pushing the mission forward. Ash then mentions that the makeup of the planet's primordial, and not trusting what's out there, Dallas decides to get the weapons. And a fat load of good they were.
Better break out the weapons.
However, in the director's cut, Kane actually holds up a gun when looking at the egg. We then see Ash psyching himself up. I don't know if it's me reaching, which is something I seem to be saying a lot in this video, but I always thought they'd done something to the sound here to make him sound slightly less human. He comes across as a very weird dude though, and just basically amping himself up to go and sit in a chair. It's the others who are thrusting themselves into the danger, and we see as the scout team then head outside. These spacesuits were apparently a nightmare to film in, as the set was incredibly hot and the suits were bulky and uncomfortable. This led to the crew fainting while filming, and in between the takes the helmets constantly had to be taken off due to them filming with carbon dioxide. A nurse was kept on set while these scenes were being shot, but it wasn't enough. Scott even put his kids in the suits at one point to break up the actors' time in them, but they also fainted as well. Now, he wasn't all Victorian workhouse, he legitimately had a reason for putting the kids in the suit, and that was because they were smaller and therefore the scale of the ships seemed even bigger. Should have really got themselves some stuff that fit though, and they could have done that by visiting our merch store below. There we have a whole host of alien themed shirts, from the ones we created when first breaking down these movies years ago, all the way through to Alien Earth. We also have big discounts for the summer as well, and lots of designs from other nerdy stuff too. Now down in the ship's tunnel, we see Parker and Brett pushing back on Ripley. They're blasting the air vent, so it's difficult for her to talk over it and constantly asking about money.
Don't worry, Parker, you'll get whatever's coming to you.
Which in hindsight makes this line seem like a bit of foreshadowing.
Why don't you just fuck off?
What?
She then brags about going back up to the bridge, and we see they're stuck in the bowels. But I do feel like the pair are the best characters in the movie, and they've got some really good camaraderie. Even just Brett lighting his cigarette with a blowtorch is such like a nice little subtle character moment. As the crew explore the outside of the ship, Lambert then says she can't see. In Scott's original storyboard, she was supposed to have a visor to aid her when trying to find the source of the transmission, but I think it works better just having them wandering in blind. The OA team were also supposed to come across a rock formation near the ship. Originally, they would then find the space jockey here, albeit fossilized. They originally also wanted to have a pyramid instead of a ship, but the Fox executives decided it was just way too expensive. The pyramid itself would originally have an egg room and hieroglyphics around it, and this would discuss the jockey's religion and society. The pyramid then morphed into a silo and later rewrites, and we learn human scientists had lured the Nostromo crew there to test out their new bioweapon. The silo itself looked like an egg and was based around the concept work that Giga did on Geely Prime for Dune. This all got scrapped though, but elements of it would pop up in the prequel movies down the line. Various designs for the derelict ship were also done by the concept art team, but they got rejected for being far too rational. It wasn't until Giga started working on it that the design was finalized as this horseshoe. The model was made from plasticine and polystyrene with a metal frame surrounding it. It was intricately detailed, but a lot of this was lost on screen, and that was due to Ridley Scott's decision to backlight the spaceship. But to be fair, looks great either way. In the theatrical cut, we then go to Ripley radioing Ash before she just sits at her console and puts up her feet. In the director's cut, she just sits at the console at this moment, with this little bit of friction being cut for the runtime. But I like it. Cutting back to the spacesuit crew, we then see them walking towards a Nostromo, and you can see a spray coming off the top of their helmets. This was actually a malfunction and was an aerosol can that accidentally set off, but it works really well. The crew then enter the ship through the holes in it, which look very, very ladylike. This is something that fits really well with the style of the facehugger and Giga designs, and just plays upon the design of female anatomy. In a deleted scene, they then debate over whether or not to enter the ship, but as we know, no entry means no more shares. They then lose contact with Ash as they explore the derelict, and it looks very xenomorph-like, which itself plays into the biomechanical feeling of Geiger's work. The tunnels have a tail-like look to them, and you can see how the xenomorphs could hide themselves on the ship here as well. Upon making their way into the cockpit, the team then come across the space jockey. This of course has been massively explored in Prometheus, but I'm gonna say it, all the time about Boba Fett, nothing is cooler than not knowing. I did not need to know Darth Vader was a kid who lived on Tatooine and worked for a guy named Watto. I did not need to know Boba Fett was a clone kid. Mysterious stuff is cool because it's a mystery. Now, the Dark Horse comics did go on to make them look like elephants named Malakax, and these got fleshed out quite a lot before things were then retconned for the Scott prequels. That explained the skeletal look was actually a suit, but I love how they kind of make him look like he's part of the chair here. And again, not knowing is better. We then get foreshadowing of what's going to happen with Kane as the crew sees something has burst out the jockey's chest. Interestingly, the crew were originally going to take the jockey's head back to the ship for testing, which is a scene that kind of got brought across to Prometheus. Kane then spots what we can presume is acid from a xenomorph that's created a hole through the ship. I love as they then decide to make their way down there, and the camera just slowly zooms on the jockey's face. Gives it focus as the harbinger of doom, and how the crew stumbled into this cosmic horror realm that they don't quite understand. The design of the jockey welds together the unknown, horror, technology, life and death. This in itself is the first alien the crew have ever come across, and just having a dead 17-foot tall elephant looking humanoid shows how even a giant is insignificant in power in what they're about to face. It also highlights the hostility of the universe and how even ancient, technologically advanced gargantuan creatures can be wiped out by what the crew's about to come across. Just the way Dallas's light goes off it as well emphasizes the idea there's something lurking in the shadows. And again, not knowing is cooler. Cutting back to Ripley, she then tells Ash that the transmission isn't an SOS, but it is in fact a warning. Once again though, Ash is a bit sus and he talks Ripley out of going to tell the crew, saying that she wouldn't reach them in time.
What's the point? I mean, but the time it takes to get there, they'll know if it's a warning or not, yes?
Again, Ash is doing whatever he can to make sure the mission goes ahead, and he's even willing to stop Ripley going to warn them. It's not like it wouldn't have fell on deaf ears either though, as Kane is a guy who sticks his face in an egg anyway. His hubris was actually hinted at in a deleted scene where he was warned about unhooking his harness. Still does it anyway, and it's all a case of how curiosity killed the cat, and his need to push on is what gets him killed. Scott's original idea for Kane was that during this descent, his suit would then light up like a Christmas tree, kind of alerting the eggs in there that something was coming. The inside of the ship is also like a rib cage, and him descending the rings is like him going through the 9 circles of hell. We also see the back of Kane's helmet at certain points, and this has been purposely designed to look similar to the alien's body, with tubes protruding like a tail. We also see the blue light over the eggs, which acts as a warning beacon. Ignore it though, mate. Originally, webbing would have covered the eggs, but it proved too costly to produce. Luckily, the Who were rehearsing for their tour next door, and the production managed to borrow some lasers from them. They then used dry eyes to produce the look that we get on film, which I think is infinitely more iconic than some webs. And what's a funny bit of trivia as well, you can actually see the lasers in the Who's Shepperton Studios gig when they play Won't Get Fooled Again. Who will get fooled again is Kane, who then slips into the pit, and the rest is history.
In the name of science, I will put my face in it.
Now, we know from the expanded lore exactly how these eggs tick. They only react to organic life, and the facehugger then slips in an alien embryo, which looks like a tadpole thing. That then lives in the person's lungs, where it gets oxygen and nutrients directly from their windpipe. They then burst forth and unleash hell and basically go on to create more little aliens. This life cycle was inspired by spider wasps, and for the movie, 130 eggs were produced, with one specifically being designed for the shots of Kane being attacked. The eggs in the facehuggers are some of the most memorable things about this movie, and they used dead animal entrails for both. The facehugger was made of a shellfish, and the stink of it got so bad on set that the cast and crew were apparently vomiting after getting close to it. When crafting the script, Ronald Schuster also said that one of the big problems they faced was how they actually got the alien off planet and onto the ship. They needed to do it in a way that didn't make the crew look like idiots, and realised that the only way to do that was have the facehugger impregnate one of the crew. As he gets in close, we also see the egg stripping upwards, which was achieved by Ridley Scott filming with the camera upside down. Gives it this otherworldly feel to it though, and how it's something alien and unnatural. The moment of the hugger inside the egg was also brought to life by Scott himself, simply using a rubber glove behind it. All of them were made of plaster, but the special one had a rubber top and hydraulic system that allowed it to open up like a pedal, and look a bit like a vagina. This design also carries over to the facehugger itself, which we do see when they start prodding it later, with a long phallic thing. I can read subtext, mate. Then leaps forth, but we cut before seeing what's happened, and I love the slow reveal as they finally get back and show the hugger wrapped around his head. The long scorpion tail and finger-like tentacles just perfectly fused together lots of different elements to give it this iconic design. This wasn't the original design though, and it did look like 2 hands, and also incredibly unsettling. Like most of Giger's work, or Geiger's work. I'll fuck it up every chance I get. Now Ripley tries to follow protocol as Kane needs to quarantine. Ash defies this though and lets him in, which is yet another clue that there's more to him than meets the eye. If he was truly a man of science, he'd understand why that's so important, but yeah, the guy clearly just wants the creature on board. It does nicely play with our expectations though, as it makes Ash seem like a nice guy. Whereas Ripley is ironically the one who's thinking logically like a machine. And you can see why her coldness makes the crew not like her. I did watch Romulus immediately after this as well, and they have a bit where they talk about an android sacrificing miners to save a larger group. Ripley is just doing the same thing, but Ash is willing to break the rules to get the alien on the ship, which also highlights his hypocrisy as he was overly interested in following the rules before. In a deleted scene, we then see the stretcher that Dallas and Lambert made to bring Kane back to the Nostromo. This would then be loaded on board the ship with robotic arms bringing in his body. I do prefer how we just cut to the helmet though, and we get an idea of just how strong that the creature is by the fact it's cracked the glass. It's something that also gets later explored in Romulus, and in the director's cut, we get Parker asking why they don't just freeze it.
How come they don't freeze it?
None of the team respond, but Romulus showed that this actually would have got it off his face. The director's cut is wildly different compared to the theatrical one this scene as well, as there Ripley arrives and Lambert slaps the shit out of her. For the theatrical, we just cut to them outside, but you can see remnants of the slap as Lambert's caressing her hand. Ash also thinks that the thing down Kane's throat is feeding him oxygen, and he tries to talk Dallas out of cutting it off.
Now, we're assuming it's feeding him oxygen. If we remove it, could kill him.
But Dallas decides to do it anyway, and we see firsthand exactly why that's a bad idea. Turns out the facehugger's blood's acidic, and we watch as it burns through the ship's hull. A point that the Now Playing podcast brought up that I think is really important as well is that typically in movies, if something bleeds, we tend to see it as a weakness. For example, Predator, if it bleeds, we can kill it. That isn't the case with these creatures though, and even their blood is a defense mechanism. We see that the creature spouts acid from its wounds, and this is strong enough to melt through the hull. This is actually something they came up with in the scripting process, as they knew audiences would ask why they didn't just shoot the creature. We then get a bit of a maybe sexual iconography as Dallas puts his pencil inside a hole with a very peculiar looking end. I know sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but this is alien. After this, we get more voyeuristic shots moving around the medical bay, which gives the feeling that there's another presence on board the ship. It's here that we then pan over to Ash, who's observing what's growing inside Kane. We move over to him in this long POV shot, which is when it's revealed this is actually Ripley's point of view. This is the first time it makes it feel like we're seeing things through her eyes, and it's a nice subtle way to kind of hint that she's the main character. As she asks some questions, Ash quickly turns off the screen, a bit like my wife when I walk in and catch her watching Screen Crush. What were you doing? He says how tough the facehugger is though, and Ripley reminds him that when Dallas and Kane are off the ship, she is in charge. Clearly, he didn't listen to that authority before though, because to him, the company is the one who's his boss. His orders come from someone else. Ash then drinks milk again, which on a second viewing could show he's topping himself up. Drinking milk in general is basically a bit of a trope when it comes to a villain, as typically it's something that represents youth and innocence. And this is a coffee, but it has milk in it. Lovely cappuccino that, I made that myself, got chocolate sprinkles on it and everything. I may not be a good movie reviewer, but I can make a cracking homemade cappuccino. But yeah, him drinking milk just adds a sense of cognitive dissonance and subliminally throws off the viewer. If you look at films in general though, we have stuff like the Droogs drinking milk in A Clockwork Orange, Shiger drinks it in No Country for Old Men, and we also have Christoph Waltz's character in Inglourious Bastards doing the same thing. Rose drinks it in Get Out, and Homelander, of course, drinks it constantly throughout The Boys. So if someone's drinking milk in a movie, then chances are they're a bad guy. We then cut to Dallas, he's listening to music in a shuttle. This is called The Narcissus, which is named after something from another of Joseph Conrad's works. That is The Children of the Sea, A Tale of the Forecastle, where the Narcissus is also the lifeboat of the ship, and it's something that Ripley uses to escape in. His chill time is interrupted as Ash says he should come and see what's up with Kane. The facehugger's done its job, and Kane's now a ticking time bomb, and this ushers in the second half of the movie. Now, you kids might not remember 1979. I don't, because I wasn't alive, but in my research, I saw the marketing for the movie basically only had the egg on the poster, and the trailer only showed the xenomorph's point of view. So audiences never actually knew what the alien was. On first viewing, you know, you might even think, oh, the facehugger, that was the alien, and that's dead now, so whew, everything's okay. The day is saved. However, nobody had any idea that the facehugger wasn't exactly the scariest part of the film, and as we later learn, there's something now lurking inside Kane. Scott also unsettles us here perfectly with the camera work. This is positioned on the floor, almost acting like the facehugger's point of view hiding from the characters. The tension's then cut with a little jump scare, but the nightmare is only gonna get worse. You might also notice that Ash has a tray ready to go. This is another clue that the life form's his priority as opposed to taking out the creature. Even after its corpse falls, Ash rushes right over to check on it, and it looks so sexy. The way the tail dangles down before it falls as well is also a great piece of table setting for the audience. We later see chains which look like tails when Brett is killed, and just having this image here kinda builds towards that. Now, we think everything is fine as Ash dissects the facehugger. There was going to be a clue though, as the mural showing the creature's life cycle was intended to be included when the away team investigated LV-426. This would show the xenomorph around the top, which we can see by the head on the right. This would then create an egg and facehugger, which would then attach itself to an engineer. The chest burster would then pop out and the cycle would begin again. As you guys know though, you know, the life cycle of the xenomorphs is been a bit all over the place throughout the franchise, and in some versions of the film, it was the crew who got turned into eggs. Aliens then introduced the Queen, and thus this cycle never really happened. There'd also be a phase involving spores, which connected to another deleted scene later on. Ash once again is exasperated with Ripley though after she says to get rid of the facehugger. He's annoyed as he says this is their first encounter with his species and he wants to take it back for science. And because it's sexy. Upon like the 100th rewatch of this movie though, I have to wonder if Dallas knew the secret orders, who's chill about going on the side quest and also happy breaking quarantine rules. He's of course in contact with Mother as well and might have had his own orders beyond what we learn. That or he's just an idiot, I guess. It is funny though because as the movie rolls on, he gets dumber while the perceived lazy and entitled Parker becomes strong and brave. Ripley also questions Dallas's orders and it seems protocols changed quite a bit. He says that when it comes to anything scientific, Ash has the final word while Dallas just flies the ship. We then learn that Ash only joined the crew 2 days before the Nostromo was to start its route back to Earth from Datus, which is another clue that something was off. It's a big change as Dallas has flown with the same science officer 5 times before, and it does hint towards the company being aware. However, in the director's cut, this information was cut. They do change things quite a lot and make it seem like the signal on LV-426 was just simply a chance encounter as opposed to the company knowing. I have always wondered what Scott's final decision was, and it has been said that the director's cut was done because that was the fashion at the time. And after Blade Runner, lots of studios were cashing in on being able to sell a movie twice. And again, he has said that the theatrical cut is the final version. In a deleted scene, we then see Parker and Brett fixing up the ship before being interrupted by Ripley. This would be on the intercom, and Parker would call Ripley a bitch after she hangs up, showing that the crew don't really like her. But hashtag Ripley was right. They then get back to the refinery, and Parker suggests putting Kane in stasis.
What I think we should do is just freeze him. I mean, he's got a disease. Why don't we stop it where it is?
Kind of is just the same point as earlier, so yeah, you can see why they cut that bit for the theatrical. We also learn they're about 10 months away from Earth, so the plan is to just go back to sleep, but this is interrupted by the news that Kane has woken up and is surprisingly happy. Very lucid. I always see this as being like the weird lucidity just before death when someone who's terminally ill is sometimes able to just get up and dance about and hit the thumbs up. Seems like everything is fine though, but there's quite a chilling moment when they ask him what he remembers.
I remember a horrible dream about smothering.
Now this dream represents a reality of him being grabbed by the facehugger which smothered him while impregnating the embryo. Dreams are often said to be representative of reality and experiences, and this smother's been brought on by the trauma that occurred to him. However, rather than being able to remember what actually went down, his brain's given him a fragmented memory that instead paints out the attack as a nightmare. Kane lost his conscious memory of the event, and this violation is something he's now subconsciously repressing so he doesn't have to deal with it. Even the way he quickly changes the conversation and says,
Gotta have something to eat before we go back.
I need something.
It's him kind of refusing to face the situation head on and instead try and move away to something else. When we cut at the table, we can see him gleefully smiling away and he's clearly thinking about the future.
The first thing that I'm going to do when I get back is to get some decent food.
I can dig it, man.
This scene is also called The Last Supper, and we have lots of biblical allegories before it all comes crashing down. Around the table, at several points, we also have the Mr. Fusion, which was later used on Back to the Future. What the film does brilliantly here, though, is that it lures us into a false sense of security. We're supposed to think the alien is dead and Kane is waking up in good spirits, which makes us begin to relax as an audience. Talked about this when breaking down lots of different horror movies, and things can only get really scary if you have things being really fun at points. For example, the Bone Temple has lots of bits that will make you laugh out loud, lots of cool light-hearted moments, but the reason they do that is because when you get to the horror stuff, it seems even more horrifying because you thought you were in a completely different movie. Kane starts to initially choke, and we see Ash coldly observing him rather than rushing over to help. Eventually he gets up, but he's the last to help out even though he's medically trained. We then get a scene that forever changed cinema, and yeah, obviously it's been talked about to death, and I'm sure you've heard everything about it, but we are being thorough. Now chances are that you've heard Veronica Cartwright and the rest of the team didn't know what was going to happen. That's mainly because of how she reacts, and there's kind of become an urban legend about this scene because of it. However, They'd of course read the script and had rehearsed this scene a couple of times. What they didn't know though is that there would be this much blood, so their reaction to that was real. Over the years though, it's kind of been twisted to be that they didn't know any of this would happen at all, but yeah, Kevin's spoilers debunks because they did know they had read the script. The scene itself creates a perversion of birth and shows it as an agonizing thing in which a phallic-shaped creature bursts out of someone's chest. It plays into the fears of sexual assault along with male pregnancy, and born from Cain is a horrifying creature that instantly kills its parent. Turns birth from being a natural and nurturing process into something that's deadly and agonizing for the parent. This scene was actually inspired by O'Bannon's struggles with Crohn's disease, in which he wanted to show the intense pain and almost bursting feeling you can have with digestive issues. Just the way Cain's twitching away behind it is so chilling as well, and we then see as it cries before scuttling across the table like a remote control car. Now, it is a moment I can't really take seriously anymore, as Spaceballs kind of parodied it to death.
Oh no, not again.
But Mel Brooks did secretly produce The Elephant Man, which starred John Hurt, and that's how he was able to get Hurt to reprise his role in that really funny parody. In what's another clue we see is Ash stops him from killing it, which allows it to go off and grow. This further damns the rest of the crew, and we then cut to the bridge where we see Cain's funeral. You're not gonna chase after the chestburster or anything. No, you're gonna spend all day wrapping up his body and have a funeral? Okay then, good idea. It's in this moment that we really see how isolated the crew are though, as no one wants to say anything for their dead colleague.
Anybody want to say anything?
Just plays into how separate they are and how it's going to be difficult for them to come together as a united force to stop the creature. So far, pretty much all the interactions bar Parker and Brett is just everyone bickering back and forth, so it's a really smart way to write a script as it makes it seem like they're not really going to be able to work together. Originally, the movie would have also featured a tryst between Dallas and Ripley. This would have happened while Brett was making the cattle prods that we see in the next scene. This was only shown in the early scripts and storyboards, and it would have shown Ripley going to Dallas for comfort. I'm glad this wasn't included though, as I think her and Dallas having zero chemistry just add to there being no real friendships and no one that the crew can trust. However, this was used for Sigourney Weaver's screen test, so there's a nice little bit of archive footage out there if you want to see them developing the character. Now, the funeral itself originally was going to feature two of the crew members going out into space and pushing Cain's body off into the void. This would have added some perspective to the ship, but I actually prefer how they handle it. Blasting him into space while everyone just sits about in silence, it just shows that they're not really processing it or even giving focus to what's happened. Just very cold and very detached. As he's ejected, we also see the lifeboat again, which just subtly brings focus back to the craft. Also cut was a confrontation between Ash and Dallas, which happened right after the funeral. There, Dallas would accuse Ash of knowing that something was going on in Cain and that he was actually protecting it. The twist that Ash is an android is of course like one of those things that you think about when you think of this movie, but I think for first-time viewers, the movie just works better removing any hint of doubt. And yeah, I think laying clues there so prominently would have probably spoiled the reveal. In another deleted scene, the crew would have also returned to the dinner table after Cain's death and discussed what to do next. It would have been a somber moment that allowed them to think about their fallen friend, but I think it just works better with the dour tone to have them instantly move on. It's in this scene that Ripley also explains that the cameras on B and C deck are down. Brett then comes up with the idea to use a cattle prod in a net, and it's during this they create a makeshift motion tracker. This has become like the most iconic tool in the franchise, and it always kind of kills me that they just threw it together for the first film.
What are you making? I'm just drilling holes. Last 2 weeks. Fuck it.
In later releases, I'm guessing they realized just how cool that this beep 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 thing was, and now everyone's got one. Kind of like the desert robe Obi-Wan wears in A New Hope, and how that kind of became like the official Jedi robes down the line. The prop itself was made from a Panasonic portable TV, and the key itself is from a Vauxhall car. Ash then teams up with Dallas and Lambert while Ripley's with the two engineers. The plan is to capture it in a big net, and it's a bold plan, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
During their search, Ripley and her team walk past a survey buggy, which is something that was no doubt inspired by the real-life lunar roving vehicle. It's only driven on the moon 8 years prior and was an amazing feat by NASA. Doesn't really get any focus in the movie, but it's just a nice bit of set dressing and something I appreciated seeing in the Crew Expendable DLC. The trio then head into another room and seem to have caught it. Really though, you might notice if you're being thorough that the tone here is different than when Dallas is alone in the ducts. This scene is a classic horror fake-out jump scare though, and it turns out it's just the cat. It runs off and then Parker explains they need to bag it so they don't get a false reading on the tracker again. So Brett heads off alone, and interestingly Chevy Chase also wore the same hat as Brett and Fletch, which has this Nostromo patch that you can see here. What I like about the sequence though is that it flips the slasher genre on its head a bit. Usually the victims are trying to run away or hide, whereas here they're actively hunting the creature. Leads into Brett being our first xenomorph victim, and it's such an incredible reveal as he heads further into the ship. The setup here is perfect as well, as we have a slow heartbeat, score rumbling in the background, and Brett then finds some skin on the floor. It obviously plays off a snake and hints that the creature's grown bigger. We then get Brett's perspective as he heads to the door, and we can see chains hanging down as he enters the room. As mentioned earlier, anything hanging down is scary now, and it nicely plays into the tail dropping down in just a bit. This moment is very tense though, but originally Brett said some very funny one-liners. However, this was removed, which I think was for the best, because I think the lack of dialogue really ramps up the tension. We then get a POV shot again which unsettles us before Brett lets water drip on his face. As we later see, the xenomorph's saliva constantly pouring from its mouth, and it's even possible that this was from the creature. In the director's cut, we actually see the creature hanging from the ceiling, waiting for the moment to attack, and I've always loved this cut and thought it was kind of a shame that it didn't get to the theatrical. Scott did say that when he was making the different cuts, he really wanted there to be a reason for you to watch the other one, so there are several big moments that are exclusive to each version that I kind of wish they'd do like a master cut and put them all together. But yeah, this is a cracking moment in the director's cut, even if I will say the theatrical cut is better. That's kind of becoming a catchphrase of the video. If you listen closely as well, you might also be able to hear there's a slight hiss sound effect in the audio, which I did think might be the xenomorph. As Brett crouches down, we then see the tail unfurl behind him, and the creature reveals itself fully grown for the first time. The cat is terrified, and the alien towers above Brett, with him being paralyzed with fear over just how big it is. In what's another bit of phallic imagery, we see it's got two mouths with a smaller one attached to a tongue. It's just an extremely iconic part of the creature, and it penetrates Brett before taking him off. Now, you can't really see it due to the lighting in the movie, but the models and figures have basically highlighted that there's a human skull inside the big blob thing. This is no eye socket, but it would show how the shape of the creature is born out of properties from its host. Now, Brett's death was originally going to be much different. According to Scott's storyboards, the xenomorph would rip his heart out, Temple of Doom style. The others would then find him with a hole in his chest, just like the space jockey, but I actually prefer that we never see what happens to him. There is a moment in the director's cut where Ripley does come across him, and we can see he's being slowly transformed into an egg. But we'll talk about that later. In the director's cut, they also race in the room at this point, and blood then drips down on them from above, which is another exclusive scene that I wish they'd put together in a big master cut. In the theatrical cut, we just have Jones watching the whole thing go down, and we then cut to the crew, who realize how screwed they are. They then discuss how the xenomorph's using the air ducts to move about, and formulate a plan to corner it and then kill it. Ash then calls it Kane's son, which I guess it kind of technically is. What it does though is show that he's way more sympathetic towards it than the rest of the crew. Normally, you wouldn't refer to a monster like this as being someone's offspring, but he does it because he has a different appreciation for it than the rest of the crew does. Ripley again then gets on Ash's case, and he suggests using fire as animals instinctively fear it. Well done mate, top tier thinking there, and from this point onwards, flamethrowers will forever be part of the franchise. They also talk about how they want to push it into an airlock and blast it into space, and originally there was a scene along these lines involving Ash where he also played his hand. The deleted scene had the creature just about to go into the airlock, and the crew watched over it on the monitors. Just before it stepped in though, Ash sounded the alarm, and it startled the xenomorph, which then made it flee. I think this would have given the game away far too early though, and because of this, I can definitely see why they removed it. So it's decided that Dallas wants to go into the vent, but Ripley does initially want to go, which kind of comments on her bravery.
Who gets to go into the vent?
I do.
No.
In a deleted scene, Dallas then gave Ash's keycard for Mother and told him to give it to Ripley should anything happen. This started a subplot where Ripley asks Ash for it after Dallas dies, and she then becomes suspicious when Ash says that Dallas never gave it to him, even though she knows he likely would have done it. As such, she was unable to enter the room where Mother was located, and then they'd have a scene where she basically goes looking for the key while the xenomorph stalks her. She would then be startled by Kane's body slamming against the window, which is something we can see from Ridley Scott's storyboards. However, this whole storyline was cut and access was automatically granted to Ripley upon death. And I did kind of wonder, like, why not just give the key directly to Ripley? Why go to Ash and be like, you have the key and give it to her? Just give it to Ripley, mate. So cut the scene. Interestingly, in the theatrical cut, Dallas also goes to visit Mother before then going into the vents. This was removed from the director's cut, but he asks the computer for advice on how to defeat the xenomorph and exactly what his chances are. Mother just has no idea and is about as useful as Google's AI summary. So it adds some tension to the scene as the guy is basically heading in there with no idea if he's going to win or not. We then see as Dallas goes into the vents, and I think this scene alone is worth buying an OLED for, as just the shot of him surrounded by the pitch black is a sight to behold. It just perfectly speaks to the darkness that surrounds him and how the character is going into the abyss. Even just the iris vent closing with him in the middle, it helps to heighten that feeling of claustrophobia. This is then emphasized with him being crouched down and able to stand while shuffling along this extremely cramped vent.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
This was all brought to life in Alien Isolation as well, with the scene getting its own section in the DLC. And it was just as tense as this movie is. Also, on a side tangent, I'll never forgive IGN for giving that game a 5.9. You bastards stopped me from buying it. Gave it a fucking 5, mate. You gave Penguin a 5 as well. I'll never forgive IGN. Seriously, what were they doing? I think what works so well about the scene as well is also the lack of lighting, with the flamethrower pretty much being the only thing that enables the character to see. Gives off this really tense feeling, and we see as the hunter becomes the hunted. Now, the original scene was going to be much more dynamic. The xenomorph would run up the walls of the vents and we'd constantly cut to it. But I feel like the scene works better due to the fact that we don't see it until it springs Dallas. All we have is a dot on the motion tracker, which allows our imagination to do the work. Seeing that dot and having the dots line up and the alien not being there, it's absolutely masterful. Then leads to a jump scare that made me shit myself the first time I saw it, but over time, it just looks like he's giving a big hug to Dallas. That said, I feel like Badejo in the suit does such a great job. He's extremely intimidating, but also balletic at points, leading to the creature having a sense of grace to it. And yes, I'm still not sure if balletic is a real word. The original design was going to be much more translucent, but I think it just works better by having it as this strange black creature. However, when they were working it, the head would have been filled with maggots, but I think the black skin of the xenomorph helps with the terror and tension, as it can hide really well in the shadows. And the maggots thing as well just sounds like a nightmare to manage. The vocalizations for the creature itself were performed by Percy Edwards, who is famous for mimicking bird and whale sounds. That scream as he grabs him, and then the static, the cut to the motion tracker, it just works brilliantly as a way to end the scene on a dramatic note. Nothing is found of Dallas bar the gun, and we then see as the crew start to crack. Lambert just wants to get on the shuttle and leave, but unfortunately the ship won't take 4. So I'll see you later, Ash, mate. Be nice knowing you, mate. There is a deleted scene as well in which Ripley tries to calm Lambert down just after Parker goes to reload the flamethrower, but I think it keeps the tension high by not having that moment. There is no comforting on board this ship. Everyone is like, fuck, we are screwed. During this, Ripley would also ask Lambert if she ever slept with Ash, and Lambert would react negatively. This then made Ripley more suspicious of the android, because apparently in Scott's vision, they were basically all going to be shagging. He even brought this up when making Prometheus, and this is why Charlie Theron's character Vickers slept with Idris Elba's Janek so easily. Apparently everyone was just having casual sex in space, because it was like one of the only things he could do. So Ripley would be very sus Ash wasn't having any, but I don't think it's something that is really crucial to the plot. So cut it and make that master version. What we do see though is that Ripley is finally taking charge. She's also shocked that he and Mother are still collating data, and it's clear the pair's just spinning their wheels. She then immediately goes to Mother and asks about Ash's inability to neutralize the alien. ChatGPT is unable to help, but she learns there are special orders only for the science officer's eyes. Luckily, she's able to override it, and she learns that ensuring the return of the organism is priority one. Crew expendable. It explains all of Ash's actions thus far and why he's been so sus throughout the movie. Also, love how he just appears beside her and says there's an explanation. Thematically, it also builds off the idea of an enemy emerging from within. Just like the creature itself popped out to reveal it had been hidden inside a human, we have a machine emerging from the group. It also makes the movie feel a bit more timeless because humans versus AI has just become more and more relevant. Going to Radio Parker, we then see as Ash makes his attack. His milky blood drips down, and this nicely mirrors Ripley's bloody nose. Also, looks a bit like cum, so there's that as well. This also starts off a staple in the franchise as Ripley gets a nosebleed in every movie. The theme of misogyny in response to Ripley's demands of the crew are paid off here as well as Ash finally lashes out at her. He's been exasperated with her throughout, and we've seen how Brett and Parker called her a bitch and how they all basically ignored her orders to quarantine. I did even wonder if there's a read in the movie about the xenomorph killing only men so far, and if that tied in with like the chest burster and forced impregnation being on a man. Women have had it tough and thus men are getting all the shit, including pregnancy. Is that a read? Well, it's in the video, so it is. I think there's definitely that theme of gender roles though, and forcing sexual things on people, as we have Ash shoving a rolled up magazine down Ripley's throat. This is while he's in an area surrounded by images of naked women, and it just ties into the whole thing with the facehugger's tube going into your mouth. Now, Scott said that Ash did this because he was an android that wasn't built with male genitalia, so he was sexually frustrated, and this was him trying to let out that tension. Ash going haywire is also due to a conflict in his programming that basically means he was always gonna go mad. Ash has been built so he has to protect human life, and yet he's also been told to put humans in danger. So this just causes a crash in his system, and it's why he starts going a bit haywire in these moments. We then see Parker and Lambert try and pull him off, and Ash does the old titty twister. Oof. Now, I did wonder if this was originally going to play off the Xeno going to rip out Brett's heart, but yeah, that might be a reach. He moves way more robotically here though, as there's no need to hide who he is anymore, and just flails about until he gets his head smashed like the like button. Guy then starts doing the robot, and killer dance moves, mate. He then sprays his white fluid everywhere, which you can draw your own conclusions on that. The crew then decides to turn him back on, with Ripley correctly guessing they wanted the alien for the weapons division.
All I can think of is they must have wanted the alien for the weapons division.
We see them later in Alien 3, and it's a nice low-key way to hint at the greater conspiracy. Ripley fixing up an android like this would also happen in that movie as well, and it nicely lays the groundwork for her fixing up Bishop. We then see his head gargle back to life. Originally, Ash's head was going to be made using an animatronic. However, this looked really bad and was constantly cooking under the lights. This is to the point that the head ended up looking deformed, so basically they got this scene where they put Ian Holm under a table and stuck his head out the top. It's state-of-the-art VFX. We do see this scuff model in just a bit though when the crew burn the robot, and I do kind of wish they'd cut around the model head being positioned before we then cut to home, because mate, that's got to be one of the most obvious edits in cinema history. Ian Holm also posthumously appeared in Alien Romulus, and that robot would be equally as messed up. To make the innards, blood, milk, caviar and marbles were used, and just creates these human yet synthetic looking organs. Ash then repeats the orders that Ripley discovered earlier, and he calls it the perfect organism. Lambert then questions if he admires it, and Ash says he does because of its purity and lack of morality. Like a machine, the creature follows its directives and isn't misguided by things like fairness and empathy.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
This is also one of my favorite quotes from the film, and it's just like, it's business, baby, nothing personal. In the final cut, this is a very short conversation, but the scene originally had much more dialogue. Ash was going to mention that robots like him were placed in secret across all the deep space ships, as this would cast a wider net for the company. It meant that there was always a company man on board the ship who could steer the crew in any direction they wanted. It also stopped them from rebelling against the corporation, as the science officer would have the final say. Another version also had Ash explaining that the xenomorph would die soon, as they have a short lifespan. Ah, nice one. So like, you just hide for a bit, yeah? Good shit, mate. I'm gonna go hide in a locker. Now, the problem with this is that the body would start to decompose, the blood would seep out of them, and this would just tear a hole through the hull. The creature would have also laid some eggs as well, which does pay off in that deleted scene later that we keep talking about. The group were then going to go to Mother, who'd refuse to help and would try and stop them from leaving. But with the numbers down, Lambert's plan wins over, and Ripley decides they should take their chances in the shuttle. They need coolant for the air support though, which the other two get while Ripley prepares the vessel. The dock then retracts and we see the Narcissus in all her glory. We mentioned it earlier, but I like how a lot of the piping looks like the xenomorph, and it just gives the feeling that it could be hidden around every corner of the ship. Also just nicely lays the groundwork for when Ripley does discover that it is indeed hiding on the Narcissus. It's on here that Ripley also hears Jonesy. This is a repeat of Brett, who also went looking for a cat, and yeah, we know what happened to him. We then see the papers moving again, just like the start of the movie, and it builds off that sense of there being something on the vessel. Luckily, Ripley manages to secure the animal, as we see the creature currently after Parker and Lambert. This is all shot really well though, and I love how there's a huge light, and we then see the silhouette of the alien, which makes it seem even bigger. Now, Lambert's death actually changed multiple times in production, and they kept toying with what to do in her final moments. She went from having her head being pulled off by the alien to being captured like Dallas, to even Parker burning her alive trying to take out the creature. This is because she wouldn't get out of the way, which we do get remnants of in her final moments.
Get out of the way, Lattice!
The production even wanted her to be sucked into space via a small hole, which was later used at the end of Alien Resurrection. They eventually settled on her dying of fright after hiding, but there was not enough time to film that sequence. As such, the footage was recycled from earlier scenes, and when the tail goes up her trouser leg, that's actually Brett. Yes, you might notice that she's got white pants on when she's shifting about the cooling units, but when the tail goes up her leg, we can see that it's blue. With Brett, this would have played more under the theme of male sexual assault, but I think that, yeah, it just works just as well with Lambert. Originally, the alien would have also had this weird obsession with Ripley, and it apparently would have been constantly trying to hump her. So there are little things like this that allude to that in the final cut, but I think it works better to not have it as on the nose as they were initially going to. For as over the top as they were planning to go with Lambert's death, I think this just works a lot better because fear like this is something that feels more grounded. Veronica Cartwright is just superb throughout the film, and she becomes more and more distraught as the horror of what she's facing is realized. And ultimately, she fails to act because of this. Parker then rushes to assist, but he's swatted by the tail and bitten by the inner mouth, while Lambert dies as we just chillingly hear her cries. Ripley is now fully alone, and she's surrounded by pipes that evoke the imagery of the creature itself and the ventilation system that Dallas was killed in earlier. Makes you feel like the creature could be anywhere, and it's here that Ripley decides to initiate the self-destruct. She also has to do this with this massive console full of levers and pulleys, and it's a really cool prop that's very analog as opposed to the screens that would probably be used today. It's called cassette futurism, which looks very timeless to me, especially as we don't really use this tech anymore. Now, for this video, I did order a Casio watch. For the first 4 sections we did, it didn't arrive, but it's shown up now, and yeah, looks timeless. £15 watch there, and you cannot go wrong with it. I think looking at this as well, and just the way stuff is in the movie, it actually feels more sci-fi than most of the sci-fi stuff now, because there's this hand-built lo-fi feeling to it. In the original plans, one of the most famous deleted scenes in history would have followed on from this moment. Yes, as I'm sure you know, Ripley then would discover Dallas and Brett cocooned in the walls, and Dallas would say words that appeared in every film after.
Kill me. I need you to kill me.
This was cut as Scott felt it interfered with the film's pacing, but it kind of explained the original life cycle. Ripley spots Brett's barely recognizable, and we can see that he's almost turned into an egg. This is known as egg morphing, and this is something that would allow the cycle to start again. But yeah, let's be honest, the Queen in Aliens is infinitely better. And while I like this scene, I kind of agree with Cameron that it is a bit stupid, and I think that it works better with them just having a hive system with a queen at its center. But it does make sense for how these creatures would repopulate if there was only one that managed to hatch. Ripley then rushes to the shuttle, which is when the creature pops up. All of a sudden, she doesn't give a shit about Jonesy and instantly drops the cat while making a run for it. Jonesy doesn't get much attention though, which does imply that it only desires humanoid life forms. This is because this is its way to reproduce, and yeah, though they'd introduced animals and different animal aliens down the line, I think just keeping it as the same species makes sense for the film. Sigourney is fantastic here as well, as she frantically runs to the control room to try and put everything back together. Doesn't work, and she then calls Mother a bitch, which is something she later calls the Alien Queen in the sequel.
You
Get away from her, you bitch!
Realizing she has to get off the ship, she then makes a dash as things start going mental. Luckily, the alien's nowhere to be seen, but as we later learn, it's because it's climbed on board the shuttle. Ripley then manages to shoot off from the ship with 1 minute remaining, and we watch as it explodes in a blinding light that just keeps going boom, boom, boom. Such a great moment just seeing it erupt over and over and over again, and yeah, surely it's dead. Like, surely it's done. We then get our first ever fourth act in an Alien movie, and every film following would have an added confrontation after things seem to have wrapped up. We see as Ripley gets ready for the long nap, and originally she was supposed to be fully naked until the spacesuit. The alien would have been watching her and got a little excited, which would have further played into its voyeuristic obsession. There's also been a bit of an urban myth that Sigourney Weaver had a bit of a Sigourney beaver and that they had to airbrush the hair that was sticking out her underwear.
But I'm not a rapper.
This has been debunked though, with no real evidence supporting it. She then catches it hiding in plain sight, and this set was actually built around Bidejos, which makes sense considering how tight the environment is. It's here that she then tries Dallas's original plan of ejecting it out the airlock. It's incredibly tense again as she needs to open it up and then force it out the shuttle. While trying this, she also sings Lucky Star, which Sigourney Weaver improvised. And luckily for the production, they had to secure the license for this song, which was apparently one of the most expensive things in the movie. I like how Ripley also has to draw the xenomorph to her, and it's kind of like using herself as bait in order to kill the creature. She uses voyeurism as a weapon this time and sits there calmly, not making any sudden moves. The creature then gets blasted out before Ripley shoots it with a grapple gun. Tying back to the themes of birth, this moment's been interpreted as a baby being pulled out the womb with the wire acting like an umbilical cord. Finally, the alien is cut free once Ripley blasts the engines, and we watch as it's sent off into space. Also love how we can see it's still moving, and it shows just how difficult to kill it is. You can't end it, you can only get rid of it, and we close the movie with a shot of Ripley sleeping, mirroring the crew waking up at the start. It was theorized as well that the xenomorph was still alive, and this was then confirmed in canon with Romulus, where they bring the alien back on board a vessel. We then see Ripley signing off and going down for the long sleep, with this imagery being repeated in the final shot of Aliens. However, originally she would have been killed just after this by an alien stowaway. In another draft, they also worked out a version where she was going to get sucked out the shuttle along with the xenomorph. That's something that actually happens at the end of Alien Isolation, spoiler alert there, and I did wonder if they kind of took that idea from that. Amanda Ripley is still alive though, you do see a flash of her at the end, and we know we're getting a second game, so yeah, it's all fine. It's kind of a spoiler, but she's still alive. They did toy with a version where Ripley would also climb back on board and set off the engines, which is a scene that they brought across to the ending of Romulus. But I don't think there's many horrors that have done it better than this, and it's still one of my favourite movies of all time. Like, I constantly go back and forth between this and Aliens, and every time I watch them, I flip on it on which one's my favourite. I think both excel in different directions though, with this being closer to a straight up slasher and horror. Personally, that's always what I tend to prefer on default mode, and yeah, if you point a gun at me on any random day and say what's your favourite, I probably will say this on autopilot. But I do know from the last breakdown series that we did on this that I said the same shit there, and then when we got to Aliens, I was like, no, Aliens is the best. But this film is obviously incredible, and the movie was wildly successful upon release. At a budget of $8 million, it made an estimated $200 million, which in today's money is about $750 million. While it received mixed reviews, the movie also won a 1980 Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Despite being successful though, executives deemed it a fluke and refused to greenlight a sequel at first. Great job guys! We all know that one would eventually come though, and the series is still going very strong 45 years later. For me, Alien is just a timeless classic that was way ahead of its time. Not only did it utilize a strong female lead that would persist throughout the franchise, but Scott brought an almost auteur style of shooting to a major motion picture. I actually think it's still his best picture, and though he's had some bangers, I don't think there's any that have changed cinema quite like this has. Even today, like, we're still getting films made in the same vein that owe a hell of a lot to what Scott did here. So yeah, excellent job. 10 out of 10, no notes, even the director's cut's fabulous as well, and yeah, fantastic day, any day I get to review Alien. It's been an absolute blast going through it with you, and I hope you've enjoyed us going on this journey. Please drop a like on the video and also drop a comment with all your thoughts below. If you want to follow us on Instagram as well and keep up to date with what we're doing, then make sure that you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Did you know as well that members of the channel also get early access to videos just like this, and if you click the join button you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. Costs just 99 cents a month, and yeah, hopefully that's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, means a hell of a lot to us and means that we can just keep doing deep, in-depth breakdowns like this. If not though, totally understandable mate, times is tough, and you've always got the free content there if you really want to watch it. We've also just done a big breakdown of the Predator series, so if you want to go over and see that, go knock yourself out mate and sit through the bloody adverts, you son of a bitch. If not though, thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.